Yes, Ranch Elder, you're first. Congratulations. I'm going to give you 3,000 Pine Points. I usually don't do that. But I'm feeling led by the Holy Spirit. What good is theism if you don't know Jesus? I think this is what bothers Christians about me, because I'll make comments like this and they gotta agree with it. It's like, yeah, Doug, you're right. What good is theism if you don't know Jesus? What good is it if you gain all these philosophical arguments for God and you still don't know Jesus? I remember a lot of Christians bring up, what's his name? The philosopher, is it Anthony Flew? Tony Flew? Well, he was an atheist all his life, and then before he died, he finally realized that theism was true. Yeah, but he never knew Jesus. Right? Did he ever become a Christian? A follower of Christ? Did he take up his cross? I don't think so. Maybe he did, but I don't think so. This video here, well, first of all, why am I playing this video? I think I've done a few videos on capturing Christianity's, yeah, that's the name of the channel, on his show before. But I'm going to play this one with Josh Rasmussen. But the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm letting my own YouTube ranking system guide me. This is the most recent one that Camille and I have been working on. These are big channels, by the way. All the small channels below 30,000 subscribers. Why 30,000? Because that's when YouTube has certain perks, memberships and so forth. Starts at 30,000. Monetization starts at 1,000. And actually, hang on. Let me clean this up here. And so out of the big channels, the Veritas Forum is, in my opinion, one of the better ones. Notice Atheist Experience is there. Mr. Atheist is there. Unbelievable is probably the best of the big channels, according to this ranking system. Even though Wretched is further to the right, Unbelievable is higher. Basically, this adjusts for subs. This is all about views, but it adjusts for how big your channel is. And in my opinion, it talks to the strength of, are you just talking to people who already agree with you? And hang on, maybe you guys want to see me? No, you don't need to see me. Well, yeah, let me. And so this is why I like this ranking system, because it's just not about preaching to the choir. And so if you're an atheist YouTuber out there, in my opinion, you should focus on the Unbelievable channel, Cross-Examined, Wretched Radio, Living Waters, Ask Dr. Brown, the Veritas Forum, Joel Osteen, Mike Winger. And if you are a Christian watching, you should focus on Apologia, Mr. Atheist, Anthony Magnabosco, The Atheist Experience. Now, these are all the big channels over 30,000. I put this on my Facebook page, by the way. And the other one is this one. These are for all channels, not just the big ones. So if you're a Christian watching, a Christian YouTuber, you should focus on T-Jump. He's like smashing it. Why do I say he's smashing it? He's smashing it because he has such a tiny subscriber base and he gets more views than some of you big channels. Like if you can get 2,000 views on 2,000 subs, you're doing something right. Capturing Christianity. Now this is the reason why I looked at Capturing Christianity's channel today, is because he's ranked pretty high. And so that's why I'm playing this channel today. You see PineCreek, I get a lot of views for, I'm still considered a small channel. What Shall I Cry Ministries? Camille found that one. I'm not so sure what that's all about. Modern Day Debate. Basically, you know how modern day debate, you'll get a nice divide between Christians and atheists in there, or theists and atheists. And so that kind of gives good evidence that this is not about preaching to the choir, that if you're further to the right, you're not preaching to the choir. Trinity Radio, you're still doing okay. Mike Lacona, Unbelievable. So if you're if you are an atheist YouTuber, you should focus on Mike Lacona, Unbelievable, Trinity Radio. Modern Day Debate, you can't really, because it's like a debate platform. And yeah, here's the ones I mentioned earlier. And if you're a Christian YouTube channel, you should focus on me. What Shall I Cry Ministries, T-Jump, Apologia. Yeah, I already mentioned those. Why should you focus on me and T-Jump and those other ones? Because you're more likely to speak to Christians. If you're an atheist YouTuber, if you're a Christian YouTuber, you're more likely to speak to atheists than on your own channel, right? and you'll probably get both sides listening more than in some of these other channels. Like, don't get me wrong, these other channels, big channels like, what are big atheist channels? Rationality Rules, Cosmic Skeptic. Great content, but odds are they're basically just people who already have left Christianity or left theism watching, right? Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. How reason leads to God. I wrote down a little, this is how I think you should talk to Christian philosophers. You can even write this down. Maybe I'll put it in the comments. And this is something T-Jump has said, I've said in the past. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain and then put a blank, rather than a new category of something called supernatural? Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain blank, rather than a new category of something called supernatural? And it doesn't matter what the Christian philosopher is talking about. You just fill in the blank, and you'll see the philosopher say, so, for example, if you're talking consciousness, isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain consciousness rather than a new category of something called the supernatural? Let's take first cause of our universe. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain the first cause of our universe rather than a new category of something called supernatural? What else do, contingency. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain non-contingent things rather than a new category of something called supernatural? And you know what? I think a lot of Christians, I think, would say, yeah, it is more reasonable if they're honest with themselves, because it's that whole induction thing. You got white duck, white duck, white duck, white duck. Why move to a black duck all of a sudden when it comes to certain questions? Why not just assume the white duck represents natural things, let's say? Why jump to the black duck supernatural thing when it seems like every time in our experience, the natural explanation seems to work? Christian philosophers ought to reject natural-supernatural distinction. Oh, sure. You don't even have to use supernatural, natural. Just call it whatever you want, just something that's different than, let's say, sound waves, flesh, whatever you want to call it. That's another problem with talking to philosophers. It's like, well, we'll get into that. Okay, so I want to show something else here. I did by the way, if you go to 3 dots on the YouTube, on any YouTube video, you'll get a new window pop up that says report, open transcript, add translations. Usually it says open transcript, not always. And I have the transcript open for this video. And what I like to do when I hear Christian philosophers talk is hold down Control F, type in Jesus, and see how many times they mention Jesus' name. And once you know it, Joss Rasmussen does not mention Jesus' name one time. Cameron does from Capturing Christianity, but not Josh. What good is theism if you don't know Jesus? Okay, let's start playing this. 1x.
All right, so let's get into today's topic. We're talking about, again, how reason can lead to God. This is my book, my version, my own personal book. And
that looks a lot like my version.
Yeah, they all look kind of the same, don't they?
Similar.
So this one, I'm really...
Let me make another comment. Okay, so his book is called How Reason Can Lead to God. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that Christians feel the psychological insecurity need to use the word reason and put it somewhere close to the word God? Like, we could say, instead of Reason Reveals God, why don't we have YouTube videos? Why don't we have books called Reason Reveals Chemistry, Reason Reveals Physics, Reason Reveals Psychology? Why don't we see, maybe there are books like that, I don't know, but it's not as prevalent as Reason Reveals God, or Stand to Reason Ministries, Reasonable Faith. It's like these Christians already know that what they believe is not reasonable, and they're trying so desperately to make it seem reasonable. Now, I know that sounds terrible if you're a Christian listening, but you hear what I'm saying? You get it? You can see that, right? You can see that maybe you feel like you've been pounded so hard the last 10, 20, 30 years, and it's like you have to work extra hard to let Christians know, no, what you believe is reasonable. But if it was indeed reasonable, you wouldn't have to keep yelling it from the rooftops, would you? That alone, I think, is pretty powerful evidence that either what you believe isn't reasonable or that you're so insecure. Actually, I actually think it's the latter, because I know some secure Christians and they don't talk about reason and God. It's like they don't need to. They don't feel the need to. That's how you can actually figure out who is a mature Christian, in my opinion, or even a mature Muslim or a mature Jew. When they don't feel the need to tell you, I am reasonable. Do you think I'm rational for believing in theism? Like, I remember when Randall Rouser was on and he asked me that question, and I'm going to be very honest and I'll put all my cards on the table. As soon as I hear a professor with a PhD ask me if I think he's reasonable or rational, I'm thinking, man, what is wrong with this guy? He's like close to my age and he's asking me if I think he's reasonable and rational. It's like, how insecure do you have to be? Sorry. I thought this video was going to be boring, but I'm actually kind of pumped up right now and I haven't even watched it yet.
About this, because last night I was reading it while I was in bed, and I usually have like a glass of water on my nightstand, and in the middle of the night, I don't know how, I don't remember this, but I knocked over my water, and so the bottom of it is a little waterlogged. So I'm really upset.
That explains why it looks different from my book.
Is Cameron hinting that Josh should get him a new book? But Josh doesn't buy it. No, you got to buy it.
Yeah, I might have to get a new one.
Okay.
Well, I also have a highlighter in the middle of it.
Come on, Josh. You says, I'll send you a new one, Cameron. Don't worry about it. That's what you should have said, Josh.
So, anyways, all right, let's get into the book. Let's get into, so you open up this book. What I really like what you do is you make a distinction between truth and treasure. And I think that's really important, because sometimes we think that if it's a treasure, then it can't be true, or we shouldn't go that route because it is sort of cognitive bias. You know, it's a confirmation bias. If it's something that you value, for instance, theism or Christianity, if this seems valuable to you for various reasons, then you want to be more skeptical of it. Anyways, I wanted to let you kind of talk a little more about that.
You know, Stupid Whore Energy asks a great question in the live stream chat. Sorry to stop it, but and I'm curious. I really, if you're a Christian who actually has written books, let me know about this. Stupid Whore Energy says, these guys ever heard of Kindle? Like, why do people have paper books? Is it because they like the sound of when they flip the pages? Like, is it an ASMR thing? Do they like the taste of paper when they lick their fingers? Why do people touch paper anymore? Like, I got a piece of paper here, but I don't get it, because with Kindle or a text version of a book, you can press Control F and you can quickly search for things. I don't understand this. Someone explain this to me. The resurrection of Jesus. This is 2019. Why is there paper books? And why did I buy this? Because I promised I would. But did you hear that when I dropped it? Listen. My goodness. I don't understand. And I also have another theory that you can tell how conservative a Christian is by whether or not they read the Bible online, or if they actually have a a book that they hold and treasure. Like it's like they worship this piece of a whole bunch of paper. But Doug, I like to highlight all this stuff. You can even highlight online now. You can have different color highlighting. You can make notes in the margins online. Hey, thank you, DB Cisco. Books work when the electricity is out. But this is what I was going to ask. You're right. Books do work when the electricity is out. However, we got things called batteries, right? And you can download it and stuff. But what was I going to ask? Yeah, Josh, if you ever watch this, how in the world do you make money off this? Like, I am really curious. How many books do you have to sell in order to even break even? Is it like 1,000, 5,000, 10,000? Like, and if let's say it's 5,000, I'm just guessing. I'm a small YouTube channel, and probably within 24 hours, I'll have 1,000 views. No, probably 2,000 views. Unique views. Is it true that within a day or two, I'm going to have more views than people who buy your book? And if so, what are you doing writing books or trying to sell books? You should have a YouTube channel. But I think you do have a YouTube channel, but it's not very popular yet.
That distinction between truth
Well,
and treasure.
we do have this powerful ability to sort of rationalize prior beliefs and to rationalize things that we might want to be true or hope to be true. And in that book, I tell my story of my own worldview falling apart, what that felt like. And one of the things that I experienced when my worldview fell apart is this tension between what I might hope to be true. I remember thinking to God, like in my mind, like, God, I hope that you're there. And even like praying, like, God, like, please be there.
Why would Josh Rasmussen hope that a God's there? Why was he praying, please be there? This gets to the root of everything. My guess is because it gives him comfort, gives him hope, gives him meaning, gives him purpose.
As if God could answer a prayer like that, right? And I just remember realizing that I couldn't just make reality what I wanted it to be. And so I felt this sort of tension between what I would hope to be true and then what might actually be true. And I think this is a tension that a lot of skeptics of God feel and recognize, and this is why.
Nah, I admire you, Josh, for saying these things, but I'm not so sure a lot of Christians recognize that within themselves. Definitely some do. I'm not saying that it's none, but I just wonder how much Christians realize that the fact that I desire this to be true so much because it gives me so much hope, meaning, purpose. Why should I even live if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, for example? I've heard people say this. Can these people recognize that within themselves, that what they do from that point to buy books about the philosophical arguments for God, do they see what they're doing? That it's a confirmation bias to make them feel good of what they already want to believe? I don't know what percentage of people recognize that within themselves and how many people just shove it underneath the rug and say, just, I don't care. I just got to believe this.
I think sometimes people are sort of turned off by an overzealous apologetic for a particular position, especially if it feels like you're just using reason to rationalize something that you want to be true rather than really honestly facing reality. And so there is this kind of tension between seeking what's true and seeking for a treasure.
And also realizing that when you're seeking for what is true, you might not get the answer in your lifetime. That's another thing you have to be prepared for.
But one of the things I also point out there in the book, that I've made this discovery that I had to choose between just trying to protect a belief and then having the courage to face reality and seeking truth. I had to make that choice. But then I also realized that there's another kind of courage, which is the courage to pursue truth about a treasure, to investigate, is there a treasure here, even before you know for sure, or even before you have evidence, to go pursue to see if you can find evidence. And the courage there is the courage of
See, I think a guy like Josh, I agree with everything he's saying to this point here, but do you view philosophical arguments as evidence? I'm not sure how Josh would answer that. It's definitely not empirical evidence, right? I think everybody's agreed with that. But I remember talking to that young guy, Chris, what's his name? Hayden, Help Me Believe channel. And I don't know if he meant to say this, but at one point, and he loves philosophical arguments for God. And I told him, hey, I'm not like that interested. And he was like, what? Well, without the philosophical arguments, we can't prove God. He basically admitted, without philosophical arguments for God, we're dead in the water.
If you can find something good at the risk of being disappointed. And so there's kind of a courage really on both sides. There's a courage to face reality, whatever it is, and then there's a courage to pursue treasure. And I think it's important to kind of emphasize these attitudes that are guiding your inquiry, because we're not just rational machines. I mean, we're human beings.
We're not just rational machines. We're human beings. Would it make you feel bad if we were just rational machines?
Many things we can seek. There are many things we desire. And it takes a certain kind of virtue and a certain kind of discipline to be careful in our thinking, to look at things from different perspectives, to look for truths that can serve people. So there's many kinds of truths. Some truths might help me appear more clever or something, but then is that really going to serve people? So there's many things to...
You notice he said, but will that really serve people? You can tell that Josh has a sincere heart and he wants to help people. But the point that I brought up earlier is not once in this video does Josh talk about Jesus. And if you're a Christian, this is the key. So my advice, if you're ever talking to a Christian philosopher, talk about Jesus. This was my strategy with Darth Dawkins a long time ago. And it worked perfectly. If you are in a conversation with Darth Dawkins, you tell him, you know what, you're probably right about everything. I probably don't have a basis for anything. I will try my hardest not to make any claims, but please help me be like you. You're a Christian, yes, Darth? Yeah. Let's talk about Jesus. How can I believe in Jesus like you do? And I tell you, he was flummoxed. He was like, here's a Christian. I don't even think Darth Dawkins is a Christian. He's just a entertainer. He didn't know what to do at that point. And I think if you got Josh Rasmussen even on a live stream like mine, if he was to come on, I would say, let's talk about Jesus, because that is, if Christianity is true, this is the most important part, right? So let's talk about it. But I don't think Josh would be as comfortable talking about Jesus as he is about the cosmological contingency argument, all these philosophical arguments. Maybe I could be wrong about that. Maybe you'd say, yes, Doug, you're exactly right. Let's talk about Jesus all day long.
Kind of virtue to discipline yourself, to seek the things that are good.
Yeah, and this is getting into the meat here. One of the things that you do right at the beginning is you establish a really big and obvious fact that's kind of like even deductive, like you can't escape this. And basically what you do is you argue that all of reality exists independently. Like if you take, well, you use an example of like a blob of something, right? Mm-hmm. You use Play-Doh as a thing that you use in your videos. But if you can imagine, my phone represents all of reality, okay? My phone, if this is everything that exists, there can't be anything outside of all reality.
By the way, if you're a Muslim listening right now, buy Josh Rasmussen's book. It will help you prove that I think Islam is true, right? If you are a Hindu who believes in a personal God, which they do exist, I talked to Max. He's a Hare Krishna, I think, type derivative, but he believes in a personal God. He's a Hindu. Max, I encourage you to buy Josh Rasmussen's book, because you can use all these arguments to show that Krishna is real and true. And Jews, I encourage you to buy Josh Rasmussen's book, because it will help you show that Christianity is false and that the one true God is, of course, Yahweh. You see what I'm getting at here? If you're talking to a Christian philosopher, talk about Jesus.
That explains the reality. But the sort of puzzle that you draw here is that all of reality exists independently, but everything that we know of in our experience exists dependently. So my phone didn't just exist eternally. It hasn't been here forever. It kind of came into being. It was built by people in a factory, or maybe machines in a factory, and a combination of the two. So this is a dependent object. Everything, you just look around, everything that you are looking at, my computer, my mouse, these books, everything is dependent. Yet if we think of reality on the whole, total, all of reality is independent. And so that raises a very interesting question. This raises a problem.
All of reality is independent, so it's not dependent on God?
How do we get independence from purely dependent things?
Yeah,
and that's kind of where you start with the book, and it's something that's really I never thought about it this way, and it really kind of hit home to me the power of the argument from contingency, because there's actually two different kinds of arguments from contingency. There's one based on dependence, and then one based on like the more traditional contingent distinction there.
Cameron, this is your guest. Let him talk.
Contingent versus necessary, but here we're talking about dependent versus independent. And this route, I think, is just extremely clear to see. Like, you can see that everything in our experience is dependent on other things for their existence, but all of reality is independent. So how does that work? It does raise a puzzle.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so how does this work? It raises a puzzle. And Josh Rasmussen's about to talk, and I got my handy cheat sheet here. So if you're whatever, you don't even have to be an atheist to say this. You could be a theist as well. But you could say, isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain non-contingency rather than a new category something called the supernatural? And you're done. Oh, I tell you, philosophers are hating me right now. They hate taking something complex and simplifying it into one sentence, because it's almost like you're taking away their reason to live.
Flows from this kind of basic fact or first step onto this bridge, which is that anything exists. Okay, so there exists something. And to kind of just give the big picture project of the book is I have a bridge with steps, and each step leads to another step, which leads to another step. And the first step onto the bridge is just that anything exists. And you might think, well, okay, that's trivial, something exists, so what? But as soon as you grant that there's something, okay, and who knows what it is, right? It could be all an illusion, but then in that case, illusions exist, right? So if you doubt that there's existence, then your doubts exist. So something exists. But as soon as you grant that something exists, you stumble into this puzzle about how there could be something. I mean, especially as you were putting it, Cameron, everything that we experience comes from something else. And if you think about what would best explain, like what principle would best explain.
Yeah, except for God. Like, he didn't even put that in.
Something. I mean, especially as you were putting it, Cameron, everything that we experience comes from something else.
Everything we experience comes from something else. But he forgot to say, except God. Or did he mean to not include God into that?
And if you think about what would best explain, like what principle would best explain our experiences, well, the simplest one, which is that everything comes from something else. I mean, think about
everything comes from something else, except for God.
This with respect to gravity. So we see that massive objects attract each other. If you drop apples in one part of the planet, they'll fall to the earth. If you drop them on another planet, they'll fall to that planet. In the simplest
Actually, I made a mistake. I apologize. Everything comes from something else except for Jesus. Yeah, if you're talking to a Christian philosopher, use Jesus instead of God.
Explanation of our observations about gravity is that gravity holds across the universe, right? The simplest hypothesis that explains the observations. And so we can apply that to our observations of cause and effect. The simplest hypothesis that explains all of our observations is that everything comes from something. So that means the totality of everything must come from something. But wait, that's a contradiction. The totality can't come from something because the totality includes everything. There's nothing beyond everything. And
so there has to be a stopping point. There has to be a point where something exists that didn't come from something else. That's what Josh is saying here. And of course, the Christian philosopher would say that something is the God that they worship and serve. The Muslim who buys Josh's book would say it's Allah. The Orthodox Jew who would buy Josh Rasmussen's book would say, of course, it's Yahweh. The personal God, Hindu, Hare Krishna type, like Max would say no. And he's actually, I have him on record saying this, that the source of all things, the non-contingent starting point is Krishna. And so, yeah, just plug in the God you want. But then if you're a guy like me, you take out your cheat sheet. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain non-contingency rather than a new category of something called supernatural? Because as Josh admitted, in our experiences, it seems like everything comes from something. He's talking about that natural, whatever naturalism means, that physicalness, cause and effect. It seems to really resonate with our experiences.
The law of non-contradiction. I mean, you can see this by pure reason, the light of reason, that there can't be something outside of everything. That something would be a something and not a something. That's a contradiction. So that's the puzzle. Everything comes from something, and yet the totality is an exception. How is that possible?
it's as clear as the law of non-contradiction itself to me. Like, you can't have an outside explanation of all reality. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter. It's like trying to, yeah. Anyways, all right, well, let's move on to, okay, so from there in your book, you go on to give a sort of hypothesis. So here's a theory, okay? Test this theory out, see what you think about it. And you have 3 pillars, and all these 3 pillars sort of work in tandem with each other.
Yeah.
The first pillar is independence, the next one is necessity, and the last one is ultimacy. Independence is about existing by itself.
Yeah.
Necessity is about existing in all possible worlds or all possible realities. And then ultimacy is about lacking arbitrary limits. And so let's look at each of these in turn, and then we'll move to some objections.
Yeah, and then we can show how each of these helps us solve this puzzle, this tension, right? Because the tension is that the totality has no outside explanation, yet everything in...
Now, remember what Josh said earlier, that he had this crisis of faith, and he cried out to God, like, please be there. I hope you're there. That sort of idea. My theory is what Christian philosophers like Josh Rasmussen is doing is he's using something like contingency, or later on he's going to talk about consciousness. It's like you can predict what they're going to say. Really tough questions that almost everyone on the planet admits are tough questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? How do you explain consciousness? All these incredibly difficult questions that we may never have an answer for. Well, my God can explain it. That's ultimately the bottom line here, what he's talking about. And not even my God, like my Jesus can explain this. And so this gets back to that confirmation bias. I really want God to exist. Hey, we don't have answers for these tough questions. I think my Jesus can explain it by just saying Jesus did it, or Jesus is the basis for it, or Jesus can account for it. And now I feel good. I feel confident. I'm not silly for believing a man walked on water or Jesus rose from the dead. You know what? To be honest, I don't know if Josh Rasmussen even believes that. A part of me thinks he doesn't. If you're a Christian listening and you ever get to interview Josh Rasmussen, ask him, do you believe Jesus actually walked on water? Do you believe Jesus actually rose from the dead in bodily form? Put him on the spot. I'm not convinced he believes that. He probably does, but something inside me thinks, I don't know if he even buys Christianity, but maybe he does.
It has an outside explanation. It can't be that both are true, because that leads to a contradiction. So we need some kind of solution to this. And so the solution there that I propose is what I call the foundation theory. That in order for there to be a reality, there's got to be some foundational element of reality, something that exists.
Yeah, and a guy like me, T-Jump has even said this to you when he talked to you. Why couldn't this be just an unknown, natural, I wouldn't even say the word natural, an unknown, non-supernatural thing? That's the foundation of all reality. If you see a white duck, white duck, white duck, white duck, white duck, why do you also say, when it comes to the foundation of reality, we got to go move to black duck, which is Jesus. Jesus is a black duck.
Without depending on something else. And it's able to be the ultimate foundation for everything else. And so, but then this leads us to ask, well, what are its attributes, right? And so, it's got to have independence. That's one of its attributes because it's foundational. It's got
an unknown non-supernatural thing could have independence.
To have, I argue for its necessity, because if it doesn't have a necessary nature, then it's just like everything else.
By definition, if it's non-contingent, it's necessary. So that could be a non-supernatural thing.
Existence that depends on something else, things that don't have a necessary nature.
But here comes the big one. I know what's coming. Personal with a mind, maybe.
I don't know if you want us to kind of go through each of those more.
Oh, he didn't say it.
Slowly, if you want me to sort of summarize them in the big picture.
No, we don't need. We don't need to. We can sort of breeze through these because I want to get to the objections and.
Yeah. And then ultimacy there, it's related to independence in that there's nothing sort of beyond it that it depends on, but also provides a kind of ultimate explanation.
Ultimate explanation. That's a key. It's like, I don't know if it's a insecurity thing to be willing to say, I don't know for things you really don't know. Now, sure, I'm not saying like wanting explanation is a good thing to drive you to find out, to drive exploration and research and so forth. But you don't plug in things, and I'm not sure if he'll do this, but you just don't plug in answers because your inner self just desires an explanation so desperately that you just plug it in with an answer.
Everything else. And so going back to this kind of opening principle that explains our observations, what I think leads to the contradiction is that there's truth in the neighborhood of the contradiction. So the contradiction was from seeing that there's nothing outside of all of reality that explains it, but then everything in our experience has an explanation. So how can you have both be true? And the solution that I propose there is that everything can be explained either in terms of some outside cause or in terms of the necessity of its own existence. And so the idea here is that anything that doesn't have a necessary nature, doesn't exist of.
I can tell you from personal experience that the vast majority of Christians don't care one bit about what Josh Rasmussen's saying. Now, sorry, Josh, if you listen to this, but I think even Christians who love philosophy are agreeing with me here that you're right now talking to maybe 10%, maybe 20% of Christians who care about this stuff. They just love Jesus. They've experienced in a real and personal way Jesus Christ. And sure, the typical Christian is going to sit back like this and hear Josh Rasmussen and say, yeah, what you're saying sounds great. Yeah, But you know what? Like, sure, I guess I'll buy your book, but I just know Jesus is real because I've experienced him. So, maybe I'm being too harsh here, but I think that's the truth. Most people do not care about philosophy, whether it's even about theism or non-theism or something completely else. So if you're a philosopher listening, please know that, realize that. that even most people don't have a good foundation for even processing or even haven't heard a lot of the words. Like you're throwing out words like contingency and so forth. What does that really mean even?
Necessity. It's going to be dependent. And so you just take the totality of all the dependent things, that total chunk of reality.
Well, Doug, if you buy my book, you'll learn what contingency means.
Will ultimately itself depend on this deeper explanation, which then exists in this necessary way. And so you've got independence, necessity, and then ultimacy. And then you mentioned arbitrary limits. The way that comes in here is that anything that's sort of limited, like it has got a limited size or limited shape, these things are just like all the other things that are dependent. And so if this foundational thing is independent, the deepest explanation of limited things is going to be in terms of something that's not limited. So you shave off the arbitrary limits. So that's a probably overly quick summary, but it gives you the basic picture.
Well, it's okay because, I mean, if you want to learn more about all of this, then pick up the book because, I mean, everything is sort of explained in all the beginning chapters and then the rest of it, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The rest of it is kind of devoted to stage 2, like looking more, like you said, at the properties of what this foundation has.
Hey, if anybody owns Josh Rasmussen's book, can you do me a favor? In Kindle version, do a search on the word Jesus. And if someone in the live stream chat has his book right now, like in their possession, do a word search on the word Jesus and let me know how many times that the name Jesus appears in his book.
But let me just let you guys know that we are going to be taking questions for Josh, but we're not going to be taking them right now. So if you have questions, if they pop up as we're talking, then just keep them in your mind, maybe write them down. Don't put them in the live chat yet because I'm not looking at them, but when I ask you to, go ahead and write them down. We do have a super chat from Russell Jones. Let me actually look at the color. Okay, it is green behind me, or yellow actually. So by the way, if you do a super chat, or the super chat here in the live chat stream, it changes the lights behind me. I got this little thing set up that's kind of interesting. But anyway, so Russell Jones, he's a great friend of mine. He is one of our biggest patrons. He says the first 10 people who sign up for Capturing Christianity Patreon at any level, I'll buy you a copy of Josh's book. I'll start a thread in Patreon where you can respond.
By the way, this reminds me of something. Capturing Christianity is planning to go full time doing this YouTube thing, social media thing, apologetics thing. And what do you meme? I just saw a video of him. He's trying to go full time with this. And I'm really actually a little nervous for you guys because I know Capturing Christianity has a wife and a child, young child, I think, right? Or maybe I'm confusing him with someone else. I know Blake does. And I'm not sure about what do you meme. But guys, be very careful what you're doing here. Christianity is on the downward spiral. Now, I realize there's a lot of very wealthy Christians in the United States who will give you money to help people not go to hell. I get that. And basically, and the way I described it is, my guess is what's happening. There are really old geezers with white hair who are terrified that their grandchildren are going to spend eternity in hell, so they'll give guys like Capturing Christianity money. But not only do you have to worry about getting support from these people and asking for money and memberships all the time, you got to worry about YouTube and certain platforms. Now, I'm on your side on this one. I'm a free speech guy, and I think but YouTube might shut you guys down. I get flagged. People who are YouTubers will understand what I'm talking about. You get a little yellow thing that says demonetized, whatever, or limited ads are on this thing. Every single YouTube flag I've ever gotten, I just press the appeal button, and within 24 hours it turns green. Now maybe that's because I never swear. I'm soft-spoken relatively. I don't scream and yell at people, but I've brought up some really tough questions. Say, for example, watch this. I'm going to say a word, and I guarantee you that this video will be demonetized. Rape. This video is now demonetized, but I'm just going to press a button as soon as it's done, and I'm going to appeal it, and then it's going to turn green in 24, 48 hours. But my point in saying all this is that for guys like Capturing Christianity and What Do You Meme, I actually think YouTube is harder on you guys. I could be wrong. But I guess if you're not getting your money from YouTube advertising, then you don't have to worry about it. So, but then you're dependent on old guys to sponsor you. I guess a whole bunch of young people with a little bit of spare change can help too.
So that's pretty cool. So in getting to this 100% mark, which again, we're 3% of the way there, or we only have 3% left. If you sign up on Patreon right now, and or patreon.com/capturing Christianity, then Russell is going to send you How Reason Can Lead to God at any level. If you sign up at the $5 level, the $10 level, whatever, he's going to send it to you. So that's really cool. Thank you so much, Russell, for doing that. All right,
Cameron,
so
if I could just insert something about the title there, the can there. It's actually really, really important to this project that reason can lead to God, but it doesn't force your mind to see that God is real. And
see, now this is very interesting to me. Reason can reason can lead to God, but it doesn't. Did he say the word force you to believe it?
But it doesn't force your mind to see that God is real. And the reason why I want to say this is because kind of the whole point of that book is to invite people on a quest of personal discovery. I even invite the reader to try to break the bridge of reason. And I really mean that. Like, I want them to test the arguments in their own mind and follow.
Break the bridge of reason? Reason leads people to God, but you want to break that bridge of reason?
All the light of reason within them, because I think that's going to lead to the greatest freedom and to the greatest insight. And I think anything that's true, there's a kind of liberty to it. Like, we're beings that we can, for even rational reasons, not see that truth. There's a timing to see truth.
Yeah, see, I think Josh Rasmussen gets non-theists, atheists, better than the average, because he's realizing that I can give you all the philosophical reasons for God that I can, but that's not going to necessarily convince you to believe in a God. And he's exactly right. There's something else going on here. I think psychology, sociology can explain it, evolution, but I think guys like Josh, definitely guys like Cameron would say this is where the Holy Spirit comes into play. You can have the contingency argument, the Kalam argument, all these arguments, philosophical arguments for God. You know what? It's not going to do one bit of good if the Holy Spirit's not tugging at your heartstrings. If the Holy Spirit hasn't already... no, the Holy Spirit doesn't plant seeds. Other people plant seeds, but the Holy Spirit uses those seeds to draw people closer to Christ. If that regenerational work hasn't been started, even non-Calvinists believe this, if that regenerational work hasn't started, I can tell you, none of these philosophical arguments for God is going to do one bit of good.
And so I just want to really emphasize the can there, that reason can lead to God. And the whole point of the book is to invite people to kind of explore it for themselves. So I'm not trying to run people over with arguments and saying you're irrational if you don't agree with me. But I do think that the arguments can lead to sight. And so in a way, there's a certain tension there because there's a freedom, but I also think you can have knowledge through reason.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, that you don't want to run over people. But I think, I really, Josh, you're not going to, if you were to present all your philosophical arguments, give me your best, I would say something like, oh, that's interesting. But isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain blank, whatever you're saying, rather than a new category of something called the supernatural, whatever that is? In our experiences, I'm just going to call it natural, we have good experience of the natural. Sights, sounds, tastes, smells, feelings. But what the heck is supernatural? How does it even exist outside of time, space? These are just things that, in my opinion, people have made up to help explain things, give comfort, and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make, and that's in line with your overall goals, is that you don't want to bash people over the head with these arguments. It's more, I think what you're doing is you're emphasizing love here. You want to love people with everything that we're doing, and it's not always about just beating people with arguments. You want to invite them to explore these ideas for themselves, and it's not about calling people irrational if they disagree. It has nothing to do with that.
Love and
yeah, but why in the world? I could be wrong about this, but I get the impression it is the Christians who are asking the non-Christians, do you think I'm rational for believing in Christianity? Am I wrong? Like, have you guys ever heard an atheist say to a Christian, do you think I'm rational for not believing in Christianity? I've never heard that. And have you ever seen a YouTube channel or a book written by an atheist, reasons stand to reason for atheism or something like that? Or reasonable non-faith? Maybe that exists. I don't know.
liberty. Yeah. And that inspires exploration for everybody to see new things. Yeah.
So let's move on to some objections. So the first one is, why do we need a foundation at all? Can't we just have sort of cause and effect that simply go on infinitely into the past? This is kind of like the infinite regress objection.
Yeah. Right. So
Chet brings up a good point. When has Cameron ever beat anyone with an argument? By the way, I've known Cameron I've talked to Cameron for, 3 years now? Before, like when he was, Cameron, he got his start by, I think, pushing back hard on street epistemology. And then he would cause trouble in various Facebook groups. This is my impression, Cameron, if you ever watch this. In my opinion, you purposely try to agitate and cause trouble to get people to come to your website, to get people to watch and listen to your content. And that helped you get a following of Christians and so forth. And you'll come up with memes and so forth. I don't blame you for this. This is great marketing. You come up with memes to get people agitated, for the Christians to say, yes, amen. And for the atheists to say, oh, that's so stupid. And, it's a great marketing technique. But when you talk about bashing people over the head with arguments, I don't remember specific cases where you've actually. Well, yeah, I do remember cases where you've brought up certain arguments in Facebook groups and so forth, but you might not be bashing people over the head with arguments, but you're trying to get the young Christian to say, I do have good reasons to believe this. I'm not stupid. I'm okay. And it's all those other people who are really the stupid ones. I think that's been your marketing ploy from the beginning.
So, one of the things I point out in this book that's interesting about this argument is that no step
Too much?
step in the argument assumes that there's only a finite chain. In fact, I make the argument that if the chain were infinite, and just to kind of visualize this, imagine you have an infinite chain of dominoes, and you see these dominoes knocking each other over. Okay, and this chain has been going on forever. You can still wonder how there could be that infinite chain. So to just continue with the vision, with the image, you could imagine that there's a table that upholds the dominoes, and that without the table, there wouldn't even be this series of dominoes. They wouldn't be able to knock each other over in that way. And of course, we can ask this about the table too. How there could be this infinite table and this infinite set of dominoes? The infinity doesn't provide an explanation of the reality. And so the basic structure of the argument leaves wide open the size of reality. In fact, Richard Taylor, he gives a version of this argument.
Thank you, Paul James. Let's pay for Cameron to converse with Doug. I don't think Cameron would ever come on my channel or anybody other's channel unless they're very kind and sensitive Christian. Cameron has admitted publicly that he struggles with anxieties, and I think a live stream causes him to be anxious. which in my opinion explains a lot of his past. I know I'm doing some psychologizing here, but when he publicly admitted that he struggles with anxieties, and I think he's publicly admitted he's being medicated for it. I look back at all the conversations I've seen him on certain Facebook groups, and I'm going, okay, this all makes sense now. He is the type of guy, I think, in my opinion, who's desperate to believe this stuff because he was struggling with his health and so forth. And then he's admitted this too, that he struggled with his brother. I think his brother became an atheist, and this is my guess, but his brother did the bad thing and made him feel stupid for being a Christian, and that probably didn't help his situation either.
Necessary foundation, and he makes the point that the mere age of a thing doesn't explain the existence of a thing. I mean, if you had a chicken, okay, and you were like, why does that chicken exist? How did it get there? And somebody comes along and says, well, that chicken is there because it's always been there forever and ever and ever. It's like, okay, but the age doesn't really explain its existence. Now, maybe if it exists forever, the way that it exists forever is because there's some deeper structure or nature that has necessary existence. And that provides a kind of ultimate explanation for that chicken.
Yes, something that has an ultimate existence that's necessary can explain that chicken. Isn't it more reasonable to say that a non-supernatural something can explain that necessary existence rather than a new category of something called the supernatural? I tell you, that one sense alone, doesn't matter what a Christian philosopher will say, you just repeat that back to them over and over and over again. But I understand that a lot of philosophers, even atheist philosophers, are going to hate that because, Doug, you're making things too simplistic.
But without this sort of ultimate explanation, merely extending the size of something out to infinity does nothing to explain its existence. So that's one level of the response, is just to distinguish this particular pathway from other interesting arguments that have as a premise that there's a finite chain. This path leaves the length of the chain open. That's the idea.
So another thing that I think might help is in the book you talk about impossible constructions. And so some things can't be...
This is reminding me of something else. I was on a live stream with a really nice young Christian guys, the JMD Apologetics. John, if you're listening, I like you. You're a great guy. I like, what's his name, Stellman. I think you guys are great. But you were talking about these philosophical arguments for God like Josh here was the other day. And I asked the question, who are these philosophical arguments for? Because what percentage of the world are atheists? Is it like 3, 4, 5, 6%? I don't know what it is. What is it? Someone can check it on Google for me. If only a single-digit percentage of the whole entire planet are non-theists, not theists, that means the vast, vast, vast majority of this planet believe in some type of supernatural realm. Not Jesus, of course, but some type of deity, deities in plural, supernatural, whatever you want to call it. So who are these philosophical arguments for? Who are you trying to convince here? Just that small percentage of wayward atheists? No. And I asked this question to these great young Christians the other day, and they admitted, well, they said both, but when it comes down to it, they admitted that these philosophical arguments for God are for them who already believe it. It's to help them not feel stupid for believing what they believe. Because if there's a supernatural realm, then that puts bodily resurrections on the table, right, Doug? Because if there's a supernatural realm, then feeding 5,000 with loaves and fishes, that's no problem. As Frank Turk said, well, if there's a God, a supernatural realm, then if he created the universe, then everything else is just silliness. It's just simple. I mean, not silly, but simple. This is what it's about. These philosophical arguments are for Christians, for Muslims. And believe me, Muslims use the exact same philosophical arguments as Josh Rasmussen. That's why I said earlier, if you're a Muslim listening, feel free to buy Josh's book. It will help you increase Islam or make you feel better about being a Muslim. These work equally as well.
constructed simply because you don't have the right parts, basically. So you can't build a green Statue of Liberty out of black charcoal, right? You've got to have the right parts. And so even in an infinite chain of dominoes, those dominoes are each dependent things. And so even if you have an infinite number of them, you're still not going to get an independent reality because you don't have the right parts.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, if each domino is dependent in its nature, and then you just stack up an infinite stack of dominoes, that entire stack is going to inherit that dependence. You're not going to get independence merely from dependence. And I would argue for this based on both universal experience. Experience testifies to this general principle that you don't get independence from dependence, and just reason itself when you think of the nature of dependence.
Except for Jesus.
Adding up dependent things.
Jesus is not dependent on anything.
Things doesn't seem to yield an independent reality. So therefore, in order for there to be this independent totality, there's got to be a kind of independent portion of reality.
There has to be an independent portion of reality. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain this independent something rather than a new category of something called supernatural?
Called the foundation.
Yeah, and this construction error, I don't know if you call it a construction error in the book, but this is going to be important later on when we start to talk about mind, because that's kind of the insight that you got there, was that you can't get consciousness out of non-conscious things. All right, well, objection 2 is, some physicists say that virtual particles come into being without a cause. And so maybe everything on the macro level is dependent, but once we get down to the micro level, stuff just sort of happens for no reason, exists independently.
I had a conversation with a logic professor, and he brought up this objection in conversation. So I was asking him, what do you think of this argument? And I had as a premise that events have causes. And he pointed out, well, virtual particles seem to appear.
Does it matter if virtual particles have causes or not? They have a probability. Yeah, this is where it's going to go. A probability of being caused to be in a certain state.
Spontaneously without any cause. And what I thought this objection really helped to clarify the meaning of the term cause. So I proposed to him, well, instead of saying that the foundation or the cause determines the effect, what if we just say that the cause makes the effect probable, and it's kind of indeterministic causal connection? And he wasn't so sure he wanted to use the word cause there, but that's okay. I mean, in the book, I'm just looking for a dependence relation between the effect and the foundation, or whatever it is. And so basically what this objection does, it helps us to clarify that we don't need there to be a deterministic link between the cause and the effect. All we need is a kind of prior condition. And our best science tells us that virtual particles don't just appear without any prior condition. There's some prior state of energy from which these virtual particles appear. And so that objection just helps to clarify that we're not talking about deterministic causation. I don't know if you want to add to that or elaborate.
No. I think that's good. Yeah, I like how you put it in the language of condition, like an earlier condition.
Yeah.
I think that kind of explains what the idea is there. So let's turn to the next objection, and then we're going to turn to sort of looking more at the foundation from the perspective of mind. But the third objection is, why can't the universe be the foundation of reality? Why can't that be the ultimate foundation?
Right. Now, you know me, Cameron, I like to define terms, right? So it depends really what you mean by the universe. Right now, if what you mean by the universe is the totality of physical things, then I want to ask, now, what do you mean by physical? And if what you mean by that is, let's say, stuff that is contingent in its nature, if you mean that, well, then we've already argued that the foundation doesn't have contingency, okay? Or if you define physicality in such a way that it implies arbitrary limit.
By the way, this was a great question. I don't know who asked it, if it was from the live stream when this happened. But this is a question that I and T-Jump have often asked, is why can't the non-contingent thing, and this is the thing that William Lane Craig even admitted to Cameron Bertuzzi when he interviewed him, that this is something. Cameron asked him, what are you least confident on? What argument are you least confident in? I think that was the question. And William Lane Craig said the contingency argument. That was one of his responses. I think I'm right about this. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was his answer. And so this is what Cam was asking. Why do we have to say that this contingency thing can't be something natural? That it's something natural is not contingent on anything else. It's necessary. We don't know about it yet, but that's what it is.
It's in boundaries, like a certain kind of shape or number of particles. Then by the argument for an ultimate explanation, the ultimate explanation of these boundaries and limitations is going to be something that doesn't have boundaries and limitations. And so really what I want to do is get clear, what is meant by a universe. But this question is what...
Yeah, and this is what atheists ask to, or even theists ask, what do you mean by God? It's the same exact questions asked over and over again, like, what do you mean by universe? What do you mean by natural? Well, what do you mean by Trinity? What do you mean by personal? What do you mean by mind? all these attributes that Christians want to layer in to this deity that's supposedly necessary and not contingent and all these things. They just start layering in things one after another because they need those things to explain certain things.
The stage 2, which is what we're going to be getting into next, which is what is the nature of the necessary foundation? And so we use some probes to investigate its properties, and then we'll see if the foundation has some properties that distinguish it from the features we see in the universe. And because I tend to be sort of kind of dialectically friendly, if somebody has a very flexible definition of universe, I have no problem with calling the necessary foundation that has a supreme and infinite nature and even is personal universe, right? I mean, that's just language, right? But it
really depends on what you mean.
Yeah, it just depends on what you mean there.
Did Josh just admit that the universe could be necessary and not contingent? Did he just admit that, depending on how you define universe? Is he saying that as long as you've defined universe to involve some personal mind or something like that outside of time, then I don't care if you call God universe? Is that kind of what he's saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe we can open that up for questions later on. If you have any objections or you want some clarification on Josh's answer there, then we can open it up for Q&A. But let's get to my last question that I have for you, which is we're turning to, 2/3 of the book is you spend on stage 2, basically arguing that there's these other properties that we can deduce that the ultimate foundation has, and one of them is mind. And so let's focus on that one because I don't spend a whole lot of time personally on that question, but I think it's really interesting. And so you think that the foundation theory that you have solves a few different problems concerning consciousness. The 3 are qualia, private access, and free will. So let's look at each of those in turn.
Yeah. And just by the way...
Yeah, I agree, Cam. I think that's what he was saying, that the universe is a placeholder or either a part of the definition of God but isn't that pantheism?
When I focus on those features, I think of these as clues into the nature of the minds that we have. And then from there, I look at, what sort of best accounts for how we could have a mind with these features.
Yeah, I don't even know if I want to listen to this because everybody knows where this is going, right? We can't explain consciousness. We can't explain this idea of qualia, this experience that's separate from something outside us that and it's first person unique and all this stuff. My advice is you take your cheat sheet and you anger the philosopher by simplifying it. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain consciousness rather than a new category of something called the supernatural? Lightning used to be explained by the supernatural. Over time, we had a natural explanation. How even muscles work, how almost anything, except for there's a few things that scientists, well, I shouldn't say a few, there's still a lot of things that we can't explain scientifically, and we might not ever explain consciousness. But why in the world, isn't it humble to say, I don't know, rather than say, oh, it has to be a supernatural something that can explain it rather than the natural, because the natural just can't do it. To me, I think this little cheat sheet is really handy. It's going to anger the philosopher and even anger atheist philosophers because they can't bloviate after that. It's just like, what's there to talk about, really? Because we're just talking about things that, it's like my cousin says, we're talking about things akin to a cat trying to understand calculus. Also, when it comes to consciousness, I would drive home the idea of, okay, we have this consciousness. What about orangutans? What about apes? What about bonobos? Do they have consciousness? Keep going down the ladder. What about rats? What about snakes? Keep going down. And of course, the Christian theist is going to say, well, I don't know. Maybe they have consciousness. Maybe they don't. Maybe we don't have consciousness, because it depends on how you define it, right? I think when you're talking to Christians especially, they necessarily define consciousness to do with something non-material. That it's something that's not matter. So therefore, that's just consciousness alone right there. Boom, done. Naturalism's dead because of the way they define the word. And my advice is don't even push back on it. Say, yeah, you know what? You could be right. But how could we test this? How could we figure out how could we bolster our confidence that consciousness is caused by something non-material or is non-material. How could we test this? I want to help Christians become even more confident that consciousness just makes naturalism dead on arrival. How can we even do better at showing that? Well, I can imagine a case where we don't have the technology yet, but what if we could kill by the way, this video is now demonetized because I use the word kill. We could kill 1,000 people, so they're dead for days and days, but we keep them like frozen or whatever, and then we hook up machines to show that they're dead, and then we have random number generators all over the room on the top, so they can't see it from where their dead body is. And then we just record the results. So we tell them before we kill them, please, there's going to be 3-digit numbers. I want you to, if consciousness is not attached to the body or mind, and if you can move about, tell us what those numbers are. And then by the way, the technology is that we could bring these people back to life because we would need to interview them later. Can you imagine, Christians, if that experiment actually happened? How much more confident you would be that consciousness is immaterial? My goodness, that would be great, wouldn't it? But Doug, we already have that. We have that. Remember Habermas? Habermas. Remember Habermas? He said this is what you explained. That happened already. Yeah. You're right. It happened, I guess, because a lady said so. We don't know who that person was, and there was no documentation. But yeah, this one lady said that's what happened. Yeah, you're right. I'm talking about something we could repeat, do it over and over again. Christians, don't you want that? Isn't it like when you could do something over and over again to show that it's true? Doesn't that make you feel more confident? I'm explaining the scientific method. And I know from my past experiences as a Christian, with Christians, talking to Christians, things like prayer and so forth, these things bother them because it's not repeatable, the results. Things that they believe God wants. God doesn't want children to suffer, does he? Actually, some Christians say yes, because he has a greater good or whatever. But most Christians, I would think, no, I don't want my child to suffer with bone cancer. So let's pray. And wouldn't you know that some kids probably do get healed from bone cancer and they give all the glory and praise to Jesus, but the vast, vast, vast majority just die? Wouldn't your confidence in Jesus Christ be bolstered if we could test it repeatedly over and over again that, wow, every time we pray in the name of Jesus, kids with bone cancer get healed? Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that make you more confident in Christianity? And if your answer is yes, then I'm appealing to you that the reverse should also make you less confident in Christianity, at least when it comes to prayer. But it seems like Christians don't want to go there. No, we can't say that. We can say we can become more confident in Christianity, but we can't say we can become less confident. Now I'm just preaching. I think that's the end of this video because, yeah, he just goes in consciousness and then it goes to Q&A. But I would strongly suggest you write, if you're, doesn't matter who you are, if you're talking to a philosopher, write this down. Isn't it more reasonable that a non-supernatural something can explain, and then have a long blank, rather than a new category of something called the supernatural? Hey, good to see you here, Joy. By the way, I do have 2 potential interviews coming up. Oh, hang on. He's messaged me right now. Can't do it today. Okay. There's I'm going to call him a progressive Orthodox type Christian. He might come on for an interview. And then I have a Muslim gentleman who wants to come on for an interview. I haven't contacted him to get with a time yet, but I think if he's Ahmadiyya, how do you say that? Ahmadiyya. It's a very, very small sect of Islam. That, by the way, that Nabil Qureshi was. It's such a small sect of Islam that most Muslims don't even consider them Muslim. If this Muslim gentleman is that type, I don't even know if I want to talk to him, because I've already had 3 interviews like that before. Are there any philosopher types in the live stream? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much did I anger you? Thanks, Brett. Chen asks, are you unbanned from Cameron's page? No. Actually, let me double check. Maybe as of now I am unbanned. Capturing Christianity. I'm on their page now. Yes, I'm still banned. I'm banned on Capturing Christianity, I'm banned on Mike Winger's stuff, and I'm banned on Daily Apologist stuff. Thanks, Ben Roberts. Oh, Nathan, I offended you 10 out of 10? 10 being really offended? Ryrez says, I like your approach, Doug, better than the philosophical approach. The problem philosopher types have is they can't shut up. They like the sound of their own voice too much. Watch this. You hear that? Silence. I'd love to have a philosopher go on his own channel with dead air. I'd probably donate to that. You know, in my opinion, people need to be offended more, not less. Because, in my opinion, it's great. It's a great exercise to have someone offend you, and you just serenity now, as Kramer would say. Why did Mike Winger ban you? The last time, I honestly don't know. On Twitter, he banned me because I asked a question that got to the root of something. I forget what it was. On his YouTube channel, he banned me because I'm effective at raising doubt. Yes, disembodied dead. You got to remember, for a lot of these Christians, there's a lot at stake. Mike Winger's one of those types of Christians. What's at stake is eternal salvation, eternal destiny. He has a lot of troubled people watching his channel who need Christianity, not just for this life, or not just for the next life, but this one. And so when a guy like me asks questions that even a Christian says, oh yeah, that's a good point, good question. It's like, no. We want to build up confidence, not tear it down. Yeah, I use street voodoo. A philosophy professor told me something was unclear in my paper, so I added a sentence that stated that it was clear with no evidence. Then he came back telling me the paper was very insightful. That's good. That's a good way to test your teachers. Yes, Raphael, I'm very bad for Christian business. Actually, no, I take that back. My guess is, this is just a guess, but my guess is Mike Winger misses me. I think it's an educated guess because I've been told by another apologist whose Facebook page banned me that he misses me. Some apologists like the fight. I shouldn't even call it fight. They like to be questioned. I think a flood is coming. What do you mean, Ben? No, Chet, I'm staying on to bother you. I'm not saying goodbye. I'm not leaving. Can we get another moderator in here to tell Chet to not use all caps? I should send him flowers. They're at a conference right now. I saw a picture of Mike Winger and What Do You Meme and David Woods, and this is another reason why Christians are Christians. And I totally get it. This is community. They're probably having a great time. I feel like Winger has retreated to entirely inside baseball topics. You're right, Apologia, and he's done that for a reason, and the reason's you. I'm not joking. Partly you. This is to bother Chet. And you know what, Apologia? Mike Winger was brilliant for doing so. Well, he has changed his goals, I think, to edify the church, to build up believers, and not try to have an answer for every atheist question or a non-Christian question. It's a great strategy. This is what Alan Parr does too. As long as there's hurting people in the world, you'll have a market. If you try to help their hurts, help their problems. And that's what Mike Winger's doing right now. He's had 2 videos in the last 5 about depression or something. I'm going to stay on here until Jesus comes. There we go. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just waiting for Jesus. Where's my chair? Waiting for Jesus to come have a seat. Yes, depression may be caused by demons. We're not sure. Actually, Jesus could be here right now because Jesus could walk through walls. So I don't know if people knew that, but in the Gospels it says he could be in a room and then gone in an instant. So if Jesus can walk through walls, he could be sitting here right now. So let's ask him a question. Can I see your holes, Jesus? I shouldn't look down when I ask that question. Jesus. Actually, I have a question for Jesus. Jesus, would you drown me? There's your answer, dude. Silence. I'm still treading water. I'm okay, guys. I'm still treading water. I'm okay. I'm getting tired.